Today, a dating app can show you 1,000 new faces before lunch. Your ancient ancestors saw the same 30 faces their entire lives. A small group cut off by mountains or ice or empty desert with no stranger in sight for hundreds of miles. Every face you know, every face is family. They had no science, no idea what a chromosome was, no word for DNA, and yet somehow they knew not to reproduce with close relatives. Not because a book told them, not because anyone explained the danger, they just knew. So how does a species avoid a threat it cannot even name? The answer isn't found in ancient wisdom or spoken rules. It's written into the body itself, into instincts shaped over hundreds of thousands of years, working quietly beneath conscious thought. Long before humans understood genetics, evolution had already been solving this problem, generation after generation, in silence. Before we go further, hit subscribe because what these ancient survival instincts reveal about your own body is going to surprise you. Every gene in your body comes in 2 copies, one from your mother, one from your father. Think of it less like a deck of cards and more like a backup generator. If one copy carries a harmful mutation, the healthy copy usually keeps running the system, quietly covering for the damage. You never notice, neither did your ancestors. Here's the problem. Every human carries several of these hidden, damaging mutations. Not a rare few unlucky people, everyone. Geneticists estimate each of us walks around with dozens of these silent glitches, masked by a working backup copy. As long as your 2 parents are unrelated, the odds that they both hand you a broken copy of the same gene are extremely low. 2 strangers, 2 different family lines, 2 different sets of hidden flaws. The chances they overlap are small. But shrink the gene pool, and that math changes fast. Close relatives share far more of their genetic code than strangers do. A brother and sister, a parent and child, an uncle and niece, they're far more likely to be carrying the exact same hidden mutation, inherited from the same recent ancestor. When 2 closely related people have children, the odds that both backup generators fail at once climb sharply. The child ends up with 2 broken copies instead of 1 working copy and 1 hidden flaw. No backup. The mutation stops hiding and starts causing real harm. Weaker immune systems, developmental problems, higher infant mortality. Now place this biology inside the world your ancestors actually lived in. Not a city, not a village with neighboring villages, a single band of people, often no more than 20 or 30 individuals, boxed in by a mountain range, a stretch of desert, or a wall of glacial ice. There was no dating pool. There was no next town over. For many groups, especially in the brutal isolation of the Ice Age, the nearest unrelated humans might be separated by hundreds of miles of terrain that could kill you just trying to cross it. This is where the danger becomes almost mathematical. In a group that small, after a few generations, everyone is related to everyone else in some way. The very thing that kept them alive, sticking together, staying close, staying loyal to the group, was the same thing quietly increasing the risk hiding inside their children. It's worth pausing here. We live in a world of near limitless choice. Dating apps, cities of millions, entire continents a plane ride away. It's easy to forget that for most of human history, choice simply didn't exist. Your ancestors weren't choosing partners from a pool. They were trapped in one, whether they realized it or not. And ancient DNA backs this up. Genetic analysis of several early human populations shows clear signatures of inbreeding, patterns that reveal small, isolated groups reproducing within a limited circle for generations. The evidence isn't guesswork, it's written directly into the genome, thousands of years later, still readable today. In 2018, geneticists analyzing ancient DNA from Denisova Cave in Siberia made a startling discovery. A bone fragment belonging to a girl who lived roughly 60,000 years ago revealed something no one expected. Her parents weren't just related. One was a Neanderthal, the other a Denisovan. And on top of that, the genetic signature showed her mother's own parents had been closely related as well. This wasn't an isolated fluke. Researchers studying multiple ancient genomes from that period, published in Nature, found repeated evidence of close relative pairings among early human populations. And when you picture the world she was born into, this stops being shocking and starts making sense. She didn't grow up choosing from a village or comparing options across a region. Her entire universe was a handful of individuals, most of them relatives, scattered across a landscape that took days or weeks to cross on foot. If you were her and every available partner was someone you'd known your whole life, someone who shared your grandparents, what real alternative would you have had? This is the turning point in the story. Biology had created a trap. Small, isolated groups were generation after generation edging closer to the exact genetic danger described earlier. Something had to give. Either these populations found a way around the problem, or the hidden mutations would eventually catch up with them entirely. The first solution didn't come from thought. It came from the brain itself, quietly rewriting attraction before a person was even old enough to understand what attraction was. Psychologist Edvard Westermark first proposed this in the late 1800s, and modern research has confirmed it again and again. Children who grow up in close physical proximity during their early years, particularly before around 6 years old, tend to develop a natural sexual aversion to one another as adults, regardless of whether they're actually related by blood. It's not a moral lesson. It's not a rule someone taught them. It's a switch that flips automatically, based purely on early exposure. The clearest evidence comes from Israeli kibbutzim, communal settlements where unrelated children were raised together in the same peer groups from infancy. Researchers studying marriage patterns found something remarkable. Out of nearly 3,000 marriages examined, almost none occurred between children who'd grown up in the same peer group, even though there was no rule against it, and even though these children weren't related at all. Familiarity itself, not biology, had quietly shut the door on attraction. Now flip that same mechanism around and it explains something else entirely. In small ancestral bands, siblings, cousins, and other close relatives spent their earliest years in exactly that kind of constant proximity. The same switch that made kibbutz peers uninterested in each other would have been doing identical work inside those prehistoric family groups, dampening attraction between people who actually did share DNA without either person ever knowing why. It's a strange thing to sit with. Your brain may have been running the same calculation before you could even walk, deciding who felt like family and who didn't, long before you had the words to explain the feeling. Instinct alone couldn't solve everything. A brain wired to avoid familiar faces still needed somewhere else to look. And that's where culture stepped in to finish the job biology started. Archaeological evidence suggests ancient bands didn't stay sealed off forever. They met at seasonal gathering sites, exchanged tools, shared stories, and, crucially, exchanged people. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies have documented widespread practices of marrying out, sending sons or daughters to neighboring bands to form partnerships outside the immediate group. On the surface, this looks like a social custom, a way to build alliances and trade networks. Underneath, it was doing something far more important. Every outside partner brought a completely different set of hidden mutations into the group, diluting the risk that had been quietly building for generations. Culture, without anyone naming the mechanism, was solving a genetic problem through nothing more than tradition and social exchange. But the strangest safeguard of all wasn't behavioral, it was chemical, and it was happening without anyone's awareness, through something as simple as a scent. Buried in your DNA is a group of genes called the MHC complex, short for major histocompatibility complex, which helps your immune system recognize threats. These genes also shape body odor in ways too subtle for conscious detection. In 1995, biologist Klaus Wedekind ran what's now known as the sweaty t-shirt study. Men wore the same shirt for 2 nights without deodorant or fragrance. Women then smelled the shirts and rated which scents they found most appealing. The results were consistent. Women tended to prefer the scent of men whose MHC genes were most different from their own. Genetically speaking, this is close to ideal partner selection. A partner with different immune-related genes produces offspring with broader, more resilient immune systems, better equipped to fight off a wider range of diseases. None of the participants knew any of this. They simply thought certain people smelled right. This is still happening today. Every time you're drawn to someone for a reason you can't quite explain, somewhere beneath conscious thought, a genetic calculation may already be running, one your ancestors relied on without ever knowing it existed. But even with 3 overlapping safeguards, instinct, culture, and scent, biology's defenses weren't unbreakable. Sometimes isolation was simply too extreme, too prolonged for any of these mechanisms to fully compensate. And no group demonstrates this more clearly than the Neanderthals. For hundreds of thousands of years, Neanderthals lived across Ice Age Europe and parts of Asia in populations that were, by modern standards, remarkably small and scattered. Genetic studies, including a landmark 2014 analysis published in Nature examining a Neanderthal toe bone from Siberia, revealed genome-wide signs consistent with a population born to closely related parents, along with broader signatures of long-term inbreeding across the species. Estimates suggest total Neanderthal populations may have hovered in the tens of thousands at most, spread thin across an entire continent in groups that likely numbered only in the dozens. Unlike the ancestral humans in earlier parts of this story, Neanderthals didn't have the luxury of easily reaching neighboring bands. Harsh terrain, brutal Ice Age climates, and low population density made the kind of regular marrying out that helped Homo sapiens diversify their gene pool far more difficult to sustain. Over tens of thousands of years, this repeated pattern of close relative reproduction would have steadily accumulated harmful mutations, generation stacking on generation, with fewer and fewer chances to dilute the damage through outside partners. Does this mean inbreeding alone wiped out an entire species? Almost certainly not. Most researchers point to a combination of factors: competition with incoming Homo sapiens populations, climate shifts, and small population sizes creating vulnerability across multiple fronts at once. But many scientists studying Neanderthal genomes now argue that chronic inbreeding likely weakened the species over time, reducing fertility, increasing susceptibility to disease, and leaving already small populations even less resilient right as they face their greatest competitive pressure. There's something worth sitting with here. The same biological trap described earlier in this video, the one Homo sapiens managed to work around through instinct and cultural exchange, may have closed in on an entire other branch of humanity. Not through some dramatic single event, but slowly, quietly, generation after generation, until there simply weren't enough healthy options left. It raises an uncomfortable question. The safeguards this video has described so far, the aversion to familiar faces, the exchange of partners between groups, the pull toward unfamiliar scent, weren't guaranteed protections. They were tools, and tools only work if circumstances allow you to use them. When isolation becomes severe enough, even evolution's best defenses can start to fail. What happens then when a group doesn't just fail to escape this trap, but deliberately walks back into it, fully aware of the risk? That's a very different story, and it happened far more recently than you might expect. Fast forward past the Ice Age, past Neanderthals, past everything prehistoric, and you land in the royal courts of 16th and 17th century Europe. Here, a family did something almost no isolated ancestral band would have done by choice. They chose inbreeding deliberately, again and again, for generations. The Habsburgs ruled Spain and Austria, and to keep their wealth, territory, and bloodline pure, they routinely married cousins, uncles, nieces, even closer. It wasn't ignorance, it was strategy, power consolidated by shrinking the family tree instead of growing it. The results were catastrophic. A 2009 study published in PLOS One calculated the inbreeding coefficient of Charles II of Spain, the dynasty's final king, and found it nearly equivalent to that of a child born from a brother and sister. Charles couldn't chew solid food properly, could barely walk until age 8, and struggled to speak clearly his entire life. His jaw protruded so severely, a trait now known as the Habsburg jaw, that his upper and lower teeth didn't meet. He was infertile. When he died in 1700 without an heir, one of Europe's most powerful dynasties collapsed. Not on a battlefield, not through invasion, but through biology. What makes this case so striking isn't just the outcome, it's the contrast. An isolated Ice Age band with no knowledge of genetics stumbled toward safety through instinct alone. A royal family, with every resource imaginable, walked willingly into the exact danger evolution had spent millions of years teaching humans to avoid. So no, your ancestors never understood chromosomes, mutations, or immune genes. They couldn't have. That knowledge was tens of thousands of years away. And yet, without ever naming the danger, they avoided it anyway, through instincts they never chose and couldn't explain. An aversion to familiar faces, a pull toward unfamiliar scent, a quiet cultural habit of sending people out into the world to find partners elsewhere. None of it required understanding. It only required survival, tested and refined across thousands of generations, long before anyone could read a single gene. The Habsburgs remind us what happens when that inherited wisdom gets overruled by ambition. And the Neanderthals remind us that even instinct has limits when circumstances close in too tightly. Which brings us back to that small band, 30 people, no strangers for hundreds of miles. They never learned the word DNA, but somewhere inside them, in choices they never consciously made, their bodies already knew it. Before natural selection had a name, before science existed at all, the answer was already written into you. If this changed how you think about instinct, subscribe for more stories about the ancient survival wiring still running inside your body today.